They say love is built on connection, but what happens when the connection is a lie? For weeks, she fell deeply, irrevocably in love with a man who knew the absolute rhythm of her soul. She cried over his words, she opened her heart to his secrets, and she promised him her future. The only problem? The man signing those letters was a billionaire fraud who couldn't write a single line of poetry, and the real man behind the words was standing right in the shadows, watching her fall.
Chapter 1: The Ghost in the Machine. The ink of another man's life is a heavy thing to wear, especially when that man is a thief. Leo sat in the dim, blue-tinged glow of 3 monitors, the steady hum of his custom-built server rack the only sound in his cramped basement apartment. On the left screen, lines of decrypted source code cascaded downward, the remnants of Ether, the revolutionary data encryption platform he had spent 5 years building, only to have it ripped from his hands. On the right screen was the man who had stolen it, Arthur Vance, CEO of Vance Global, looking impossibly polished in a tailored charcoal suit on the cover of a major tech magazine. But it was the center screen that held Leo's hands frozen over his mechanical keyboard. It was a blank text document, titled simply, letter_to_Vivienne_01. Give her something poetic, Leo, Arthur's voice echoed in his mind from their brief, transactional phone call an hour earlier. She's an old soul. Grovels for the classics. Tell her I'm thinking of her while I'm running the empire. Make her believe I have a heart. Do your job, and your consulting fee stays secure. Leo's consulting fee was, in reality, the blackmail money Arthur paid him to keep Ether running behind the scenes, because Arthur didn't know the first thing about the back-end architecture. But this new assignment wasn't about code. It was about Vivienne Montgomery. Vivienne was the daughter of the city's most influential venture capitalist, the final piece Arthur needed to secure the upcoming corporate takeover and cement his legacy. The marriage was supposed to be a merger of dynasties, but Vivienne, a brilliant archivist and literary historian, refused to marry a hollow suit. She wanted a partner of substance. So, Arthur had hired a ghostwriter. Leo closed his eyes. His fingers hovered. He had spent weeks analyzing Vivienne's digital footprint, not to exploit her, but to understand the target. What he found had unnerved him. She didn't post selfies or vacation shots, her public profile was a quiet repository of scanned 19th-century poetry, critiques of modern digital isolation, and photographs of rain-slicked cobblestones outside the archives where she worked. She was a living anachronism, trapped in a hyperdigital world. Just like him. He began to type. But as the keys clacked, the mask of Arthur Vance slipped away. Leo didn't write as a billionaire suitor trying to close a deal. He wrote from the raw, bleeding center of his own chest, the part of him that felt utterly invisible, the part that had been betrayed, the part that looked at the cold, clinical world of corporate greed and felt an aching loneliness. Vivienne. They tell us that the world is built on data now. That everything we are can be reduced to ones and zeros, to algorithms that predict our choices before we even make them. But tonight, looking out at the city lights, I find myself resisting that certainty. I find myself wondering if the things that truly matter are the things we cannot measure. I am surrounded by noise, by people who speak in strategies and bottom lines, yet I have never felt more profoundly silent. They look at me and see a man who commands empires, but the truth is, I feel like a ghost inhabiting a house I didn't build. I write to you not to offer you a resume of my successes, but to ask if you, too, ever feel the weight of a world that moves too fast to care about what is real. Yours, in the quiet. Arthur. Leo stared at the final signature. A wave of nausea hit him. He was signing another man's name to his own soul. He hit send, routing the email through Arthur's private, secure server. He didn't expect the response to come at 3 in the morning. The notification chimed, a soft, crystalline sound in the dark room. Leo sat up, his heart hammering against his ribs. He clicked it open. Arthur. Your letter reached me at a moment when I was beginning to think the world had completely run out of honest men. The man I see in the press conferences, the one who speaks of disruption and market dominance, has always felt 1,000 miles away from me. But the man who wrote this letter, he feels entirely different. You speak of being a ghost in a house you didn't build. I know that architecture well. I spend my days surrounded by dead poets who understood that vulnerability isn't a weakness, but the only true form of courage left to us. If this is truly who you are beneath the noise, then perhaps we have more to talk about than our father's boardrooms. Tell me about the things you've lost. That is where a person truly begins. Vivienne. Leo leaned back in his chair, the breath leaving him in a long, trembling exhale. He stared at her words until they blurred. She wasn't responding to Arthur. Arthur couldn't use the phrase architecture of a ghost if his life depended on it. Arthur used terms like synergistic scaling. She was responding to him. For the first time in 2 years, since his company had been stolen and his identity erased into the background of the tech industry, Leo felt seen. He reached out, his fingers touching the glowing letters of her name on the glass screen. I'm sorry, he whispered into the empty room, a profound sense of dread and exhilaration twisting in his gut. I'm so sorry, Vivienne. Turning back to his keyboard, he began to write the second letter. He told her about the agonizing beauty of creating something from nothing, of pouring your life into a design only to see it twisted by those who didn't understand its heartbeat. He disguised it as a metaphor for corporate fatigue, but it was his pure, unfiltered truth. He was falling into a trap of his own making, weaving a tether between his isolated world and hers, using a monster's name as his shield. Chapter 2: The Architecture of Words. 3 weeks passed, measured not in days, but in correspondence. The letters had evolved from occasional notes into a desperate, daily ritual. To the rest of the world, Arthur Vance was preparing for the largest corporate takeover of the decade, absorbing 3 rival tech firms into the Ether ecosystem. But in the private digital dark, a completely different story was being authored. Leo found himself living a double life. By day, he systematically mapped the vulnerabilities in Arthur's network, embedding hidden backdoors into the code of his own stolen software, preparing for the day he would pull the rug out from under the tycoon. By night, he bared his soul to Vivienne Montgomery. He learned that she took her coffee black with a dash of cinnamon, that she preferred the smell of old paper to the sleek efficiency of an e-reader, and that she felt a profound pressure to be the perfect, dutiful daughter to a family that viewed her as a diplomatic asset. And Vivienne, in turn, was falling deeply, irrevocably in love with a ghost. Arthur. Your last note about the contrast between structural architecture and emotional space was beautiful. I read it while sitting in the courtyard of the St. Jude Library. You write with a sort of brilliant, wounded precision, like someone who understands how things work, but wishes they didn't have to. I must confess something. Tomorrow, I am supposed to meet your executive assistant, a Mr. Leo Vance, your cousin, my father mentioned, to hand over the original archival deeds for the historical property your company is purchasing. But I don't want to deal with assistants anymore, Arthur. I want to see the man who writes these letters. Why do you hide behind intermediaries when we are together in public? Why do you only show me your armor when we dine? Let me see the ghost. Vivienne. Leo read the email twice, the blood rushing to his ears. Leo Vance. Arthur had lied to the Montgomery family, claiming Leo was a distant, eccentric cousin kept on the payroll out of charity, rather than the true mastermind behind the company. It was a tactical lie to explain why Leo's name was still buried deep in the foundational patents of Ether. But more importantly, she wanted to meet. Or rather, she was going to meet him, thinking he was merely the courier for the man she loved. The next afternoon, the St. Jude Library was bathed in the amber light of a late autumn sun. The air inside smelled of dust, leather, and centuries of quiet thought. Leo stood near the heavy oak tables of the historical archives section, holding a sleek, black leather briefcase. He wore a simple tweed blazer and dark jeans, a sharp contrast to the tailored suits Arthur wore like battle armor. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Then, the heavy double doors creaked open. Vivienne Montgomery walked in, and the breath caught in Leo's throat. She was more striking than any digital image could convey. She wore a long, forest green wool coat, her dark hair pinned up loosely with a few stray curls framing a face defined by sharp intelligence and striking, dark eyes. She carried herself with a quiet grace, but there was an undeniable tension in her shoulders, the weight of expectations. She looked around, her gaze sweeping past the grand columns until it landed on him. Leo forced himself to breathe, stepping forward. "Miss Montgomery?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual. She paused, studying him. There was a sudden, sharp flash of confusion in her eyes. She tilted her head, her gaze lingering on his face, tracing the lines of his jaw, the weariness around his eyes. "You're Leo? Arthur's assistant?" "Consultant," Leo corrected gently, offering a faint, self-deprecating smile. "But yes. I handle the logistical details Arthur doesn't have time for." Vivienne didn't hand over the documents immediately. Instead, she stepped closer, her dark eyes locking onto his with a strange, searching intensity. "It's odd," she murmured, almost to herself. "What is?" "Your voice," she said, her brow furrowing. "And your eyes. You look exactly like." She trailed off, shaking her head, a soft blush coloring her cheeks. "Forgive me. I've been spending too much time buried in old texts. I'm losing my mind." "A beautiful place to lose it, though," Leo said softly, gesturing to the towering shelves of books around them. "There are worse fates than being trapped in a room full of people who spent their entire lives trying to say exactly what they meant." Vivienne froze. She stared at him, her lips parting slightly. The words he had just spoken were a near-perfect echo of a sentiment he had written to her in a letter 2 nights ago. "What did you just say?" she whispered. Leo realized his mistake instantly. A cold sweat broke out on the back of his neck, but he maintained his composure, forced a casual smile, and gestured to the briefcase. "Just an observation. I notice you spend a lot of time here. I admire the dedication to preserving things that the digital world wants to rewrite." Vivienne slowly reached into her bag and pulled out a thick, ribbon-bound folder of parchment documents, the deeds Arthur needed. But she didn't hand them over. Instead, she sat down at one of the long oak tables, looking up at him. "The courier who brought the last batch of corporate contracts was out the door in 30 seconds, she said, a challenge in her voice. "Are you in a rush, Leo?" "Arthur expects these back at the office by 5, Leo said, his conscience screaming at him to walk away, to protect the mission, to protect his heart. "Arthur can wait 15 minutes, Vivienne said firmly, patting the wooden chair next to her. "Tell me about him, Leo. You're his family. You see him when the cameras are off. Is he the man he writes to me in his letters? Or is he the man I see on television?" Leo sat down slowly, the distance between them shrinking to a mere couple of feet. He could smell her perfume, something subtle, like crushed lavender and rain. Looking into her eyes, he felt a profound, agonizing conflict. He could destroy Arthur right now. He could tell her the truth. But if he did, the corporate coup would fail, Arthur would bury him legally, and worse. Vivienne would look at him not with this budding warmth, but with horror, realizing he was the monster who had been tricking her. "Arthur is..." Leo swallowed hard, choosing his words with agonizing care. "He is a man entirely consumed by his vision of the future. He believes that to build something great, you have to be willing to leave everything else behind." "And what about what he leaves behind?" Vivienne asked softly, her eyes locked onto Leo's lips, then rising back to his gaze. "In his letters, he speaks of a profound regret. He speaks of a stolen soul. He speaks as if he has lost the very thing that made him human." Leo's heart broke a little in that moment. He leaned in just an inch closer, unable to stop himself. "Maybe he didn't lose it," Leo whispered, his voice thick with a genuine emotion that hung heavy in the air between them. "Maybe it was just taken from him. And maybe, he's just trying to find someone who can help him remember what it felt like to have it." An undeniable, electric spark flared between them. Vivienne's breath hitched. She reached out, her fingers brushing against Leo's hand as it rested on the table. The contact was brief, but it felt like a lightning strike. She looked at his hand, then up at his face, her eyes wide with a sudden, dizzying realization she couldn't quite articulate. The man sitting in front of her, the mere assistant, possessed the exact, haunting cadence, the exact wounded depth of the soul she had been falling in love with through the ink. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Before Leo could answer, his phone buzzed violently on the table. The screen lit up with a harsh, demanding text from Arthur Vance. "Where are the deeds? Get back here now." The spell was broken. Leo pulled his hand back, feeling the cold air rush into the empty space. He stood up, taking the folder from the table with a trembling hand. "I have to go," Leo said, his voice tight. "Thank you for the documents, Miss Montgomery." "Vivienne," she called out as he turned to leave. He paused, his back to her, closing his eyes. "Call me Vivienne," she said softly. Leo didn't turn around. He couldn't. If he looked at her again, he would tell her everything, and ruin them both. "Good night, Vivienne," he murmured, and walked out into the gathering dark, carrying her documents in his hand and her heart completely in his possession. Chapter 3, The Mask and the Mirror. The penthouse office of Vance Global looked out over the city like a glass cage built for a modern king. Arthur Vance stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, swirling a glass of neat scotch. The amber liquid caught the reflection of the neon skyscrapers below, but Arthur's focus was entirely on the man sitting at the sleek boardroom table behind him. Leo was staring at his laptop, his fingers flying across the keys as he uploaded the archival deeds Vivienne had handed him. Every click of the mouse felt like a betrayal, yet every line of code he injected into the system brought him one step closer to dismantling Arthur's empire. "She liked the last letter," Arthur said, not bothering to turn around. "Her father called me this morning. Said Vivienne was uncharacteristically agreeable during their breakfast. She stopped fighting the timeline for the merger. Whatever garbage you're writing, Leo, it's working." "It's not garbage," Leo said, his voice flat, keeping his eyes glued to the monitor. "It's what she wants to hear. She wants substance, Arthur. If you want this merger to go through, you have to maintain the illusion." Arthur laughed, a sharp, barking sound that lacked any genuine warmth. He turned around, leaning against the glass. "Illusion is the foundation of the market, cousin. People don't buy what's real, they buy what looks good on a billboard. Or, in Vivienne's case, what sounds good in a tragic poet's diary. Keep sending them. We need the Montgomery venture capital cleared by the end of the month." Arthur walked over to the table, tossing a printed piece of paper in front of Leo. "Here's the itinerary for the charity gala this Thursday. It's the formal announcement of our partnership. I'll be doing the press walk with her. I need you there in the wings to manage the tech presentation if her father asks for a live demonstration of the Ether rollout." Leo looked down at the paper. His name was listed under technical support/logistics. A ghost in the machinery of Arthur's triumph. "And Leo?" Arthur added, leaning down, his shadow falling over Leo's keyboard. "Make sure the next letter mentions the gala. Tell her how much I'm looking forward to holding her hand in front of the world. Put some of that pathetic, longing romanticism into it." Leo's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. "Right." 2 hours later, back in his basement apartment, the silence felt heavy, almost suffocating. The contrast between Arthur's sterile, glass and steel world and this damp, subterranean sanctuary was jarring. Leo sat in front of his monitors, but he didn't open his hacking tools. He opened the correspondence portal. His fingers hovered over the keys for a long time. How could he write to her now? How could he pretend to be Arthur promising to hold her hand at a public gala, when the mere thought of Arthur touching her made a toxic mix of rage and jealousy burn in his throat? He began to type, but the words didn't come from Arthur's voice. They couldn't. "Vivienne. The world demands a performance from us soon. This Thursday, under the bright lights of the gala, they will expect a spectacle. They will look at the jewelry, the suits, the smiles for the cameras, and they will call it a romance. But I need you to know the truth. When you see me standing there, surrounded by the noise of high society, do not look at the armor I am forced to wear. Look past it. The man who writes these words to you is a prisoner of his own circumstances, caught in a net of his own making. If I seem distant when the cameras flash, if my hands feel cold, remember that the only part of me that is truly alive is the part that speaks to you in the dark, through these pages. I am terrified of losing the clarity we have found here. Promise me that whatever happens under those lights, you will remember the man who knows your soul, not the man who commands the room. Yours, entirely. Arthur. Leo hit send, feeling a hollow ache in his chest. He was actively pleading with her to ignore the real Arthur's coldness, effectively protecting the fraud's cover. He was protecting the lie because the truth would mean losing her completely. He was a coward, hiding behind a thief's name, falling in love with a woman he could only possess as a phantom. Chapter 4, The Shared Sanctuary. The Rains Botanical Conservatory was an oasis of humid green and glass in the center of the concrete city. It was also where Vivienne had asked to meet Leo to hand over the remaining historical catalog entries for the Ether database. Leo arrived early. He stood beneath the towering canopy of a prehistoric fern, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming orchids. The glass ceiling above was slick with a gentle afternoon rain, blurring the gray shapes of the surrounding skyscrapers. When Vivienne arrived, she wasn't wearing the structured, formal clothes of a billionaire's daughter. She wore a simple, oversized cream sweater and dark trousers, her hair falling loosely around her shoulders. She looked younger here, stripped of the high society expectations, but her eyes were restless, searching. "You look like you're hiding," she said, stepping out from behind a massive banana leaf, a soft, teasing smile playing on her lips. Leo turned, his heart doing a violent flip in his chest. "Just appreciating the architecture. It's rare to find a place in this city that lets things grow without forcing them into a grid." Vivienne's smile deepened, a spark of recognition lighting up her eyes. "You do that a lot," she murmured, walking closer until she was standing just a foot away from him. "Do what?" "Speak in metaphors that make me feel like I'm reading my own thoughts," she said softly. She held up a leather folder but didn't hand it over. Instead, she tilted her head, studying his face with an intensity that made Leo's breath catch. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about what you said at the library, Leo. About people trying to find someone to help them remember what it feels like to be human." Leo looked away, his eyes tracking a drop of rain sliding down the glass pane above them. "I shouldn't have said that. It wasn't my place. I'm just an employee." "Stop saying that," Vivienne said, her voice dropping to a fierce, quiet whisper. She stepped into his line of sight, forcing him to look at her. "You are not just an employee. I see how Arthur treats people. He treats them like assets, like tools to be used and discarded. But you have his eyes, Leo. You have his history, yet you carry it like a wound, while he carries it like a weapon." Leo felt a cold panic rising, mixed with a desperate, blooming hunger to just reach out and hold her. "Vivienne, you don't understand the dynamics of the Vance family. Arthur is what the world made him. He has to be strong. But is he the man who writes to me?" Vivienne pressed, her dark eyes wide, swimming with a raw, vulnerable confusion. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the printed email Leo had sent the night before. "He wrote this to me last night. He told me to look past his armor at the gala. He told me he was a prisoner of his own circumstances." She stepped even closer, the distance between them dissolving. The humid, warm air of the conservatory seemed to amplify the heat radiating between them. "When I read these letters, Leo, I feel a physical pull. I feel like I am talking to someone who is standing right in front of me, breathing my air, understanding my silence. But when I dine with Arthur, he talks about profit margins and public relations. It's like he's a stranger who memorized a script." She looked down at the letter in her hand, then looked up at Leo, her breath coming in short, uneven intervals. "And then I meet you. And every time you speak, every time you look at me, I feel the exact same pull I feel when I read these pages. Tell me I'm not crazy, Leo. Tell me there isn't something pulling us together." Leo's hand shook. The truth was a physical weight in his throat, suffocating him. He looked at her beautiful, earnest face, at the lips that were only inches from his own. He wanted to tell her. God, he wanted to tell her that he was the one who knew the rhythm of her heart, that he was the one who stayed up until dawn waiting for her replies, that he was the one who loved her. But if he confessed now, the sting of the deception would ruin everything. She would see him as a manipulative predator, a hacker who used her deepest vulnerabilities to play a game against Arthur. "You're not crazy," Leo whispered, his voice cracking with an agony he couldn't hide. He reached out, his hand trembling as he gently tucked a stray strand of dark hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed against her warm skin, and a visible shiver ran through her. "You're not crazy, Vivienne. But the world is complicated. Sometimes, the things we want are trapped behind walls we can't tear down yet." Vivienne leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a brief, transcendent second as his fingers lingered on her jawline. "Then help me tear them down," she breathed, opening her eyes, looking at him with a fierce devotion that belonged entirely to him, to the real man, the ghost in the machine. Leo let his hand drop, the loss of contact feeling like a physical wound. He took the leather folder from her unresisting hands. "Wait for the gala," Leo said, his voice thick with emotion, stepping back into the shadows of the ferns. "Watch him closely, Vivienne. Look past the armor, just like the letter said. And then you'll have your answers. I promise." He turned and walked away through the mist of the conservatory, leaving her standing alone in the green sanctuary, both of them vibrating with a dangerous, beautiful frequency that was rapidly spinning out of control. Chapter 5, Under the Neon Lights. The Grand Plaza Ballroom was a cathedral of glass, mirrors, and predatory ambition. Hundreds of the city's elite moved beneath massive crystal chandeliers, their laughter sharp and practiced, blending with the low, jazzy hum of a live string quartet. Tonight was the formal unveiling of the Vance Montgomery Alliance, a multi-billion-dollar merger wrapped in the elegant packaging of a high society charity gala. Leo stood in the shadowed wings of the grand stage, dressed in a simple black suit that made him blend seamlessly into the background of technical staff and security. In front of him, a massive control console displayed the live diagnostic feeds for Ether. But Leo's eyes weren't on the code. They were locked on the center of the ballroom floor. Vivienne was breathtaking. She wore a floor-length gown of midnight blue silk that seemed to catch the light with every step she took. Her hair was swept up, exposing the elegant line of her neck, but her expression was a mask of polite detachment. Standing beside her, his hand possessively resting on the small of her back, was Arthur Vance. Arthur was in his element, flashing a blinding, practiced smile for a wall of flashing press cameras. He leaned down, whispering something into Vivienne's ear, his posture mimicking the intimacy of a deeply devoted suitor. From the wings, Leo watched Vivienne's reaction. He saw the subtle, almost imperceptible flinch in her shoulders when Arthur touched her. He saw the way her dark eyes scanned the crowd, completely detached from the man whose arm she held. She was looking for the ghost. She was looking for the man who had promised her, in the quiet dark of a digital connection, that he was a prisoner waiting to be freed. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies' voice echoed through the high-end sound system. "Please welcome the CEO of Vance Global, Arthur Vance, and Miss Vivienne Montgomery." The crowd erupted into applause as Arthur led Vivienne up the stairs toward the stage. As they passed the technical wing, Vivienne's gaze swept across the backstage area. For a fraction of a second, her eyes locked onto Leo. The air left Leo's lungs. The intensity in her gaze was staggering, a silent, desperate plea for clarity. She looked from Leo to Arthur, her brow furrowing slightly, the profound confusion that had been torturing her for weeks evidently reaching its boiling point. Arthur took the microphone, stepping up to the podium with absolute confidence. Thank you all, he began, his voice smooth and resonant. Tonight, we aren't just celebrating a merger of two great institutions. We are celebrating a vision of a connected future. A future where security, data, and human connection are seamlessly integrated through ether. Arthur paused, turning to look at Vivienne with a smile that looked perfect for the cameras. As I wrote to someone very special to me recently, we live in a world built on data, but the things that truly matter are the ones we cannot measure. We must look past the armor we wear to find what is real. A collective "ah" rippled through the high society crowd. Leo felt a sick, violent twist in his gut. Arthur was quoting the first letter. He had memorized the lines Leo had poured his own soul into, using them as a marketing script to close a corporate deal and win a woman's hand. Leo looked at Vivienne. She had frozen. Her eyes went wide, a sharp intake of breath visible from across the stage. But she wasn't looking at Arthur with adoration. She was staring at him with a sudden, horrifying realization. Arthur reached out, taking her hand to pull her closer for the press photo. Leo watched Vivienne's face drop. When Arthur's fingers closed around hers, there was no spark, no warmth, no mutual recognition. It was just cold, transactional skin. Vivienne pulled her hand back slightly, her gaze snapping instantly toward the wings, searching the darkness until she found Leo standing by the monitors. The truth was staring her in the face, a terrifying, beautiful silhouette in the shadows. The cadence belonged to the letter, but the soul belonged to the man in the wings. Chapter 6, The Breaking Point. The presentation transitioned into a promotional video, the lights in the ballroom dimming to a deep, dramatic blue. Seizing the moment of darkness, Vivienne slipped away from Arthur's side, ignoring her father's calling whisper, and navigated the maze of heavy velvet curtains leading to the backstage technical corridor. Leo was adjusting a server node when he heard the sharp, hurried click of heels on the concrete floor. He turned around just as Vivienne burst through the security doors, her breathing shallow, her face pale under the dim utility lights. "Vivienne," Leo said, stepping forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. "You shouldn't be back here." "The press." "Quiet," she commanded, her voice trembling but fierce. She closed the distance between them with a frantic energy, stopping just inches from him. The midnight blue silk of her dress brushed against his dark trousers. "Do not say another word about Arthur, or the press, or my father." She pulled the printed copy of the letter from the pocket of her cloak, which was draped over a nearby equipment chair. Her hands were shaking. Arthur just stood on that stage and spoke the words from this letter. He spoke them like a politician reading a teleprompter. She looked up at Leo, her dark eyes swimming with tears, a mix of anger, vulnerability, and absolute certainty burning in her gaze. "But when he touched my hand, Leo, it was dead. There was nothing there. No rhythm. No depth. It was just a hollow suit." Leo stood frozen, the heavy hum of the server racks behind him sounding like a ticking time bomb. "Vivienne, please." "No." She stepped closer, reaching out to grab the lapels of his suit jacket. Her touch sent a jolt of pure electricity through his veins. "The man who wrote these letters knows what it feels like to lose everything. The man who wrote these letters looks at me and sees me, not a VC funding round. Look me in the eyes, Leo, and tell me to my face that Arthur Vance wrote these words." Leo looked down at her. The proximity was agonizing. He could feel the rapid rise and fall of her chest, could smell the lavender and rain of her perfume, could see his own reflection in her wide, searching eyes. The weight of the lie was crushing him, but the fear of losing her was worse. "I can't do that," Leo whispered, his voice completely stripped of its defenses, raw and bleeding. "Why?" she breathed, her lips parting, her gaze dropping to his mouth before rising back to his eyes. "Why are you doing this? Why are you giving him your soul?" "Because he took everything else." Leo exploded, the built-up rage and grief of the last 2 years finally fracturing his composure. He didn't pull away, instead, he brought his hands up, his fingers gripping her forearms, holding her close in the narrow corridor. "He stole ether, Vivienne. It was my architecture. My encryption. My life's work. He blackmailed me, buried my name, and relegated me to a ghost in my own company. And then he asked me to write to you. Vivienne's breath hitched, her eyes widening as the final pieces of the puzzle violently crashed together in her mind. It was you, she whispered, a tear finally escaping and sliding down her cheek. From the very first night, it was always you. Yes, Leo said, his voice dropping to a fierce, desperate murmur. He slid his hands up from her arms to cup her face, his thumbs gently wiping away the tear. The contact was explosive, a release of weeks of agonizing, suppressed longing. Every word I wrote was real, Vivienne. I wasn't generating prose for him, I was pouring my heart out to the only person in the world who seemed to understand what it felt like to be invisible. I fell in love with your mind before I ever saw your face. I fell in love with your soul. Vivienne let out a broken, relieved laugh, leaning heavily into his palms. I knew it, she whispered, her eyes locking onto his with a fierce devotion. I knew I wasn't crazy. I wasn't falling for him. I was falling for the man behind the words. Vivienne, I'm sorry, Leo said, his forehead resting against hers, their breaths mingling in the dark. I wanted to tell you. I was so terrified you'd hate me for the deception. I could never hate you for being real, she said, her hand sliding up his chest to wrap around the back of his neck. She pulled him down, her voice a fierce command. Don't let him win, Leo. Don't let him keep what belongs to you. He won't, Leo promised, his eyes darkening with a newfound, lethal resolve. Tonight is the end of Vance Global. The presentation I'm about to run, it's not a demo. It's a kill switch. Vivienne looked at him, a brilliant, dangerous smile breaking through her tears. Then let's burn it down together. The atmosphere inside the Grand Plaza ballroom had reached a fever pitch. The promotional video faded to black, and the house lights swelled just enough to illuminate Arthur Vance as he stepped back to the center of the stage. He adjusted his silk tie, basking in the anticipatory hush of the city's most powerful investors. Behind him, the massive, 3-story LED screen flickered, displaying the sleek, golden logo of Ether. And now, Arthur's voice boomed with corporate grandiosity, we will initiate the live, network-wide integration. With the financial backing of the Montgomery Group, Ether will become the mandatory security framework for every major financial institution in the country. To demonstrate its absolute stability, we will execute the live launch right now. In the wings, Leo stood over his console. His fingers were no longer trembling. The crushing weight of the mask had been lifted, replaced by a cold, clinical focus. Beside him stood Vivienne. She had refused to return to her father's side in the VIP box. She stood right in the shadows with Leo, her hand resting firmly on his shoulder, her touch a grounding, electric anchor. Are you ready? She whispered, her eyes reflecting the amber glow of his monitors. Leo looked up at her, a faint, genuine smile touching his lips. I've been ready for 2 years. Arthur looked toward the wings, flashing a subtle, demanding nod at Leo, a command to press the button and complete his triumph. Leo smiled, looked Arthur dead in the eye from across the stage, and struck the enter key. Instantly, the golden Ether logo on the massive screen fractured. It didn't load the corporate dashboard Arthur expected. Instead, the screen flashed a stark, clinical white, followed by cascading waterfalls of raw, unencrypted source code. A murmur of confusion rippled through the audience. Arthur's smile faltered. He cleared his throat, maintaining his stage persona. It seems we have a slight formatting glitch with the presentation slide. It's not a glitch, Arthur, a voice cut through the auditorium. Leo hadn't just executed a code script, he had routed his own technical headset microphone directly into the ballroom's main audio system. His voice, calm, resonant, and entirely stripped of subservience, echoed from the towering speakers. The cascading code on the screen suddenly halted, wiping away to reveal a series of legal documents, original patent filings from 3 years prior, and a high-definition video feed of Arthur's private server logs. At the top of every original patent, stamped in bold, irrefutable digital typography, was the name, Leo Vance, sole creator and architect. What is the meaning of this? Vivienne's father, Marcus Montgomery, stood up from his front row table, his voice booming with administrative authority. Arthur, what are we looking at? Arthur swung around, his face turning a dangerous, mottled red as he stared at the screen, then snapped his gaze to the wings. Leo! Shut it down. Cut the power to the screens now, he hissed, dropping the microphone from his mouth, but the stage monitors still picked up his frantic commands. Leo stepped out from the curtains, walking calmly into the bright spotlights. He didn't wear the posture of an assistant anymore. He carried himself with the quiet, undeniable authority of a creator reclaiming his world. Vivienne walked right beside him, her hand slipping down to lock her fingers firmly into his. The sight of Vivienne holding Leo's hand sent a shockwave through the crowd. Flashbulbs began firing in a frantic, blinding rhythm. Arthur looked around wildly, realizing the walls had completely closed in. The investors were turning away, the press was capturing every second of his public execution, and the woman who was supposed to secure his legacy was looking at him with utter revulsion, her fingers tightly intertwined with the man he had tried to erase. With no moves left to play, Arthur was marched off the stage by two heavy-set security guards, his empire collapsing into dust with every step he took. Leo stood in the center of the stage, the bright lights blinding, the roar of the crowd a distant buzz. He felt a sudden, profound lightness in his chest, the phantom weight of the last 2 years completely evaporating. He turned to look at Vivienne. She was already looking at him. The chaos of the ballroom, the flashing cameras, and the ruin of Vance Global completely faded into the background. "You did it," she whispered, a brilliant, breathtaking smile lighting up her face. "We did it," Leo corrected softly. He reached up, his hand cupping her cheek, no longer hiding in the dark, no longer signing another man's name to his feelings. He looked into her dark eyes, seeing the exact same depth, the exact same quiet sanctuary he had fallen in love with through the ink. "I don't have a corporate empire to offer you anymore, Vivienne," Leo murmured, his voice thick with a raw, honest emotion. "Just a basement apartment, some code, and a heart that belongs entirely to you." Vivienne leaned into his touch, her eyes shining with absolute devotion. "I never wanted an empire, Leo," she whispered, pulling him down toward her. "I just wanted the man behind the words." When their lips finally met, it wasn't a performance for the cameras or a transaction for a boardroom. It was the collision of two isolated souls who had found each other in the dark, a perfect, undeniable rhythm that belonged entirely to them. The ghost was gone, and for the first time in his life, Leo was completely, beautifully visible.
Thank you for watching, dear darlings. Don't forget to like and subscribe the channel for more such story.